So as well as leading the legal component of the research for this project, I also led a couple of the workshops, most notably the horizon scanning workshop that took place in China. So given that that was quite an interesting one and the situation in China is quite complex, in fact, I have made a short video just to let you know some of the kind of main features of 3D printing and IP in China and what came out of that workshop. So the China workshop took place in Shenzhen in Guangdong province, just across the border from where I am at the moment in Hong Kong. And we conducted the workshop almost exactly a year ago in September 2017 in the Shenzhen University Creative Park. The workshop was conducted in Mandarin, and I was assisted by Dr. Jiajie Lu, who is a native Mandarin and Cantonese speaker. He also assisted in participant recruitment. So we had 10 participants from a variety of backgrounds, including intellectual property lawyers in private practice, representatives from the 3D printing industry, the creative industries, and university researchers from a number of fields as well. Both before the workshop and after, we've conducted some background research on the situation in China to kind of keep us better informed of what's happening with 3D printing and IP there, both in terms of structuring the workshop and in terms of making sense of the data that we gained from the workshop as well. So I'm sure it's not a surprise to any of you that China is considered to be very much the world's factory in terms of the mass production of many of the items and objects that we use now in our daily lives, pretty much by people all around the world. Many of the 3D printing machines that are used as well are also manufactured in China. China traditionally, or at least in the last kind of few decades, has been regarded in the West as being a user of intellectual property more than a creator of intellectual property. And this seems to be one of the premises of President Trump's trade war, as China has often been viewed as being an illegitimate user of the IP of others. When it comes to 3D printing, you'll see that in many of the government policies around 3D printing, particularly in developed economies, whether that's in Western countries or developed countries in the East, such as Singapore, many of these policies view the encouragement of 3D printing as a means of onshoring manufacturing back from China, where these countries and their industries have offshored it to in the past few decades. But of course, as we found out in our research, 3D printing is also being used in China as well. So it's not as if these other countries will use 3D printing and gain manufacturing back from China, and China itself is kind of not using 3D printing. That's very far from the case. China is also using 3D printing. And in fact, there are also Chinese government policies to upgrade manufacturing there from the kind of low-skilled mass manufacturing, such as policies that are known in English as Internet Plus and the now notorious Made in China 2025 policies, which encourage kind of the upgrading of manufacturing to being kind of more advanced, digitized manufacturing, including but not limited to 3D printing. And also these policies, particularly Made in China 2025, encourage homegrown Chinese innovation and creation. In addition, part of China's transition over the last decade or so has included evolving attitudes towards intellectual property. So I think this view in the West of China as being just a user, an illegitimate user, rather than a creator or even a legitimate user is not entirely correct, or at least is not the full story. So for instance, there have been various reforms to intellectual property law in China by the Chinese government, although enforcement remains still a challenge. So even if the laws have changed to be more stringent and stricter, they're not always well enforced. However, another government policy has provided various forms of encouragement and incentives to actors in China to create and register their own IP rights. So for instance, Made in China 2025 encourages IP accumulation through patent applications and also the creation of well-known brands, homegrown Chinese brands. And for 3D printing at least, China seems to be on course to achieving this goal, at least in the terms of patent applications. The WIPO report from 2015 shows that I think in the period up to from 2006 to 2011, China was top or the second top country internationally for patent applications regarding 3D printing. And more recent research on bioprinting, specifically patents in the bioprinting field, has shown that the US and China are the top two countries internationally filing patents. Now, I know that not all patents that are filed are the quality of the patents may not always be entirely assured, and that there are some criticisms of this kind of number or quantity of patents in China not necessarily reflecting quality patents. But nevertheless, there has been this kind of strong encouragement and incentives, particularly for publicly funded bodies such as universities and other forms of research institutes in China to file patents. So these have been kind of some of the major kind of government interventions in the area. When it comes to kind of the ecosystem and actors in China for 3D printing, somewhat similarly to the situation of internet services and products, China has its own ecosystem there, where they have kind of Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent providing services, whereas we have kind of Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple in the rest of the world. So similarly to this kind of Chinese ecosystem for the internet products and services, there's also a kind of Chinese ecosystem for 3D printing services. So while we have kind of Thingiverse as being the most popular and prominent site globally for file sharing, in fact in China Thingiverse is not as popular, and prominent services instead are two of these the prominent services are called SimpNeed and Muho. And Muho, in fact, has just started offering English language services, interestingly enough. And these are kind of more closer in form to Shapeways file upload and print on demand service rather than the Thingiverse model. In addition, China has seen the emergence of some new and innovative 3D printing design service companies, and the most prominent of those is one called Exuberance with an X, which is based in Shanghai, established in 2014, and it would seem to be a kind of good example of the kind of innovative design digital manufacturing company that Chinese government policies such as Made in China aim to create and foster. We write more about Exuberance in the report, but suffice it to say here, part of their strategy as well seems to be kind of the accumulation and monetization of copyrights that they themselves are creating. So a very different idea or a different sort of vision to the not very creative but highly kind of illegitimate user character or caricature of China that many in the West have with regards to IP. Not to say that infringement is not happening, it is happening, but one of the kind of strong themes that came out in our research, both the theoretical and the empirical part, was that this is not presenting the full picture for 3D printing and IP in China. When it came to our workshop and understanding what the kind of shape of 3D printing and IP in China might be, the potential future scenarios. Interestingly, particularly compared to the UK, in fact, there seemed to be our participants strongly considered that 3D printing in China in 2025 would be very much a kind of digital capitalist picture. And in fact, this would involve kind of policies, maybe not very different from the sort of conventional IP policies that currently exist in Western countries, and that perhaps exist on the books in China, but may not always be enforced. One of the things that our participants disagreed on quite a lot was whether this kind of digital capitalist vision would be a very globalized one or one that's more local and localized to China. And they felt that this would be determined by the extent to which China opens to the rest of the world culturally and the extent that its homegrown industries internationalize economy. In some respects, China is already very much open to the world economically, but maybe not entirely open culturally for various reasons at the moment. But our our participants felt that China would have to open more culturally in order for this vision of 3D printing in the year 2025 to be very much a globalized one rather than one that's just local to China. But in fact, these two ideas of kind of globalization and kind of localized or a Chinese industry may not be in opposition to each other. At the moment, we see that Chinese internet services are currently transnationalizing, more so in other Asian countries, but part of the Chinese government's flagship One Belt, One Road initiative also comprises a kind of digital Silk Road element, which is encouraging this sort of globalization of the Chinese internet, for good or ill, in fact. But if that is successful, if Chinese internet services do become more globalized and particularly kind of penetrate through to the West, it may well be that by 2050, 3D printing has both Chinese capitalist characteristics and is globalized, but with these Chinese characteristics being disseminated internationally, which we felt was a very interesting kind of perspective, particularly compared to what we found in the UK, which was the participants kind of issued a sort of capitalist future for 3D printing.